The Edmonton Oilers finally have clarity on who's going to be making their decisions. The Ken Holland era has come to an end. A whole lot to talk about on today's edition of Locked On.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everybody making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So today's episode, we got the news. The question going into today that I talked about on yesterday's episode of the show was who's going to be making the Oilers' decisions? Is Ken Holland going to get an extension? Is there going to be an internal promotion? So we have our answer. Ken Holland and the Oilers agreed to mutually part ways. Ken Holland may or may not be looking for another job in another organization, or he might just step away entirely from hockey. So we'll see there. Jeff Jackson, the president of hockey operations, is going to run the draft, take care of free agency on an interim basis. He said, though, he does want to find an underling. He does want to find a general manager to separate those two roles because president of hockey ops and general manager are two different roles, and they do have a lot of different demands. So today's episode, kind of the Ken Holland era retrospective. We're going to tackle the history, where the Oilers were at when he got here, where the Oilers have gone, where they're at. Talk about the good moves Ken Holland made, and then the third segment, we'll talk about the bad moves Ken Holland made, because every general manager, there's good, there's bad, and yes, there's some ugly. So at the outset, I think it's important to contextualize any historical period, because what you think about somebody in hindsight with the benefit of present day information, it's not always fair to with the benefit of present day information. You're just, especially when it comes to sports where these decisions are so related and cold, where with the benefit of hindsight, there are a lot of trades or free agent signings or draft picks you just wouldn't make if you had the opportunity to make the right decision with the benefit of present day information. So you got to remember, Ken Holland is coming in here in the spring of 2019 of Peter Chiarelli throwing money at all kinds of Oiler problems, signing Cam Talbot in free agency. Comes to mind in particular, he had one good season for them, signing Benoit Pouliot in free agency. That comes to mind. But the Oilers under Chiarelli, and because of that, the Oilers were not making the most of their situation. You gotta remember, when Ken Holland gets hired in 2019, the Oilers have been to the playoffs once in the span of their last Stanley Cup final appearance, 2006, and Ken Holland's arrival. That was McDavid's second year in the league, where the Oilers lost to the Ducks in the second round in 6 games. They very well could have won that series against the Ducks, and then maybe we're having a different conversation if that team makes a conference final that early. Maybe there are different decisions to be made. Maybe Chiarelli doesn't get as aggressive with some of the decisions he makes. But in the benefit of context, we'll start with the outset. Ken Holland is undoubtedly the most successful Oilers general manager of the 21st century. Now, that's not a particularly high bar. They made the playoffs a handful of times at the beginning of the century, 2001, 2, and 3. They make the Cup 506, and then they don't make the playoffs again until 2016, 2017. It is a long layoff in there. Then they miss the playoffs 2 more times. Ken Holland comes in, and we should account for this. Ken Holland had to stay in Detroit like 3 weeks before agreeing to jump ship to Edmonton to take the Oilers job. So with that in mind, it's hard to kvetch. It's hard to really view Ken Holland because the bar was so low. Did he do a tremendous job? No, not really. Did he do an atrocious job? No, not really. There's a lot of meh and whatever decisions. There's a few god-awful decisions. There are a few morally questionable decisions, which we'll talk about later. And then there's a few good ones. So it's a very mixed bag, but the facts are the facts. The Edmonton Oilers won more playoff series under Ken Holland than they've won under any other general manager in this century. And they've had quite a few. Kevin Lowe, Steve Tambolini, Craig McTavish, Peter Chiarelli, and then Keith Gretzky was the interim GM for the months between Peter Chiarelli's firing and Ken Holland's hiring. One playoff appearance in that 13-year period, and they only won one playoff round in that time. Lost to the Ducks in 6 games. That was the only playoff appearance McDavid and Draisaitl had to their ledger before Holland's arrival. Now, you got to remember, they do lose in the qualifying round to the Coyotes in 2020, losing to Taylor Hall in their own building. Not a great look. And Ken Holland has made some okay decisions. He's hired 3 different coaches during his tenure: Dave Tippett, Jay Woodcroft, and Chris Knobloch, who was hired on an interim basis back in November. But we're all going to assume he's getting this job full time. In Ken Holland's tenure, the Oilers have 6 playoff series wins to their name. To be fair, 3 of those happened this year. The 3 wins against the Kings, the Stars, and the Canucks, and unfortunately not 4. If the Oilers win the Stanley Cup with Ken Holland, I think there's any conversation that he's easily their best general manager since the dynasty window, but because they didn't, he only gets to be the best general manager of the century. And again, that's not a particularly high bar. The Oilers were not well run. It was very important for them to kind of close the door on the old hockey man club. And yes, Ken Holland is one of the old hockey guys, 4 Stanley Cups in Detroit, long track record in that organization, but moving away from guys who have direct ties to your organization, Kevin Lowe, McTavish, Tambellini, you can't take away those guys' track records as players. What they did for the Oilers as players, incredible. You can't, and that's the real conundrum of hiring team legends to do anything in your organization. It's a really untenable position for the team and the coach because, A, you can't embarrass a legend. It's why when the Yankees were purportedly maybe going to hire Derek Jeter to be their general manager, I thought that was a really bad idea. It's why anytime Mark Messier has asked to be the Rangers head coach or the Rangers general manager, that's a really bad idea because that puts someone in the position of how do I fire Mark Messier? And the Oilers do have questions. They have a lot of decisions they need to make this summer to address this upcoming season and the one after that. We covered it on yesterday's show. 8 unrestricted free agents, 2 restricted free agents, a whole lot up for Jeff Jackson to decide on for a period of time. The Stanley Cup final ended on Monday. I am recording this episode Thursday evening. It's going to go out Friday. That's 4 days. They've had 4 days to figure this out. Ken Holland told the Oilers Wednesday that he was not going to continue the position. He would not be seeking a new contract. Free agency opens on Monday. The buyout window has been open since Tuesday. The draft is this weekend. There is a whole lot that is going to happen in a very short period of time. Now, you assume the Oilers have been game planning for both contingencies. If Holland stays, he was working on a plan. If he doesn't stay, the support staff, the other people in the front office, pro scouting, amateur scouting, all of these people are working on their plans based on what they think is going to happen and having multiple outcomes. At least that's what a well-run team does. They handle their business up front. They have plans laid out. And because of that, you hope they are set up for success. There are big fish to fry. The Oilers need to figure out if Leon Draisaitl is going to get the long-term extension this summer, and they need to figure out if Evan Bouchard is going to get the long-term extension this summer. They're both eligible for extensions. They are both under team control for the upcoming season. With all of that said, you don't want to give Ken Holland a great grade because, frankly, some of the mistakes that he made, the Oilers are going to have to deal with the ramifications of well after he's gone. The counterpoint to that is he's the only GM with a real track record of success with this organization in the last 25 years. Again, it's not a particularly high bar, but when you get some results, it's important that you're able to acknowledge both sides of it. And I think Ken Holland, thoroughly middle of the pack. I think C+, B-, right on that curve of average to occasionally above average. And yes, he does have the bell curve, bell curve of having McDavid and Draisaitl handed to him upon taking this job. I don't think Ken Holland is as eager to jump ship from Detroit, which was a sinking ship in 2019, if the team he's going to doesn't have McDavid and Draisaitl. So we are going to take a quick break. We're going to come back, and then we're going to start with the good decisions Ken Holland made as general manager. So be sure to stick around to Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning champions is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time. Your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it is easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. I want to thank everybody listening to this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. If you're watching live on Thursday evening, thank you. But if you're one of the people listening or watching on Friday, thank you for making Locked On Oilers a part of your day, whether it's first thing in the morning, on the way to work, on the way to school, or if you're a masochist in the gym first thing in the morning, or on the way home, try to decompress going into the weekend, mentally that looms ahead. Thanks for putting the show into your rotation. It means a lot as a creator. The best thing you can do for a creator is give them your time. So let's start with the good. Contextualizing the information we have now. Some of these decisions may not look as good 2-3 years from now, but in the moment, we can say right now on Eastern Standard Time on Thursday, June, these were good decisions. Number one, and yes, I have this number one, not the one that's number two. Trading for Mattias Ekholm. Undoubtedly, the biggest for the Oilers jump in success over the year and a half, 2 years, is the addition of Mattias Ekholm, one of the premier defensive defensemen in today's NHL. He has a skill set that, frankly, just not a lot of defensemen have. His ability to play quality defense while also being a quality puck handler is really upper echelon. You know, we're talking Gus Forsling, we're talking Chris Tanev. There are a handful of guys in that tier of shot suppressor who is also able to plays with the puck on their stick. To get him unlocked another tier of effort. I thought Bouchard was always going to be a good NHL defenseman. He profiled very similar to some of the other ones we've seen in the last handful of years, Fox, Makar. I would add Noah Dobson to that mix. And I'm not comparing Noah Dobson to Adam Fox and Cale Makar. Similar skill sets. I know Noah Dobson, a little bit bigger, a little more physically imposing than the other three I just mentioned, but similar offensive archetype, decent to above average skater, but most importantly, quality puck skills. To truly get the most out of that type of defenseman, you need the quality complementary defense. Without that, your offensive defenseman is going to have a harder time because ultimately that offensive defenseman is going to have to play defense at some point. And you look at some of the teams around the league, you look at Philip Roenick. I don't know if I necessarily agree that he was that important to the Canucks' success and that they gave him the extension they did. But you think about him, you think about Alex Romanov with the Islanders, where that's his role. Lindgren when he plays that on Fox, Devon Toews when he plays with Cale Makar. You need that complementary defensive defenseman to unlock what your offensive guy can do. And without that, you have a very different team. And you think about how the Oilers have tried a lot of different candidates to be that puck mover, offense first guy. They brought in 38-year-old Duncan Keith, who we'll get to in the bad move segment. They gave Darnell Nurse the huge extension coming off of a career year in a weird year, also coming in the bad contract section. Tyson Barrie, not in the bad move section, but very clearly miscast for what the Oilers tried to have him do. They slow played Evan Bouchard's development, eased him into his responsibilities, and now he's clearly one of the 5 or 10 best defensemen in the entire league. If I had a Norris ballot, I voted him third in my ballot that I posted on awards or tonight. I would have had Bouchard third behind Hughes and Roman Josi. I thought Bouchard was outstanding all regular season long. And you don't get that offensive burst and the improvements and all of those underlying numbers without a quality defensive partner who mitigates needing to play defense at all. And that's the key to understanding what makes Bouchard so successful. He's not a shutdown guy, but if he has the puck a lot, you're going to be able to do a lot of damage, and playing as little defense as possible. That's the key to the NHL in 2024. Number 2, signing Zach Hyman in free agency. I was very surprised 54 goals, most in any season since 2010. 24 players have scored 50 goals in a season. There have only been 24 50-goal seasons since 2010, not 24 different players. A couple guys. Ovechkin several times. Draisaitl 54. If Panarin didn't exist, I think there'd be a real argument Zach Hyman might be the best free agent signing in the salary cap era. Panarin, very clearly an MVP candidate, caliber player, top 5-10 player in the world when he's at his most engaged, when he's at his peak, like he was in the regular season this year. Panarin had, I believe, 49 goals. Yeah, he had 49. He had 2 in the last game and needed 1 more for the hat trick to get to 50. But Zach Hyman undoubtedly has unlocked another tier of his game by riding shotgun with great players. And you can say all you want about he's a mooch, he plays on the power play with the best players in the world. All that's great. The Oilers have tried a lot of different guys in that role with McDavid and Draisaitl on the power play to convert offense. And you got to give Hyman kudos for his ability to go to the net front and just take a beating around the net front. Yeah, he scores a bunch of tap-ins, he scores deflections, he scores rebounds, the goalie's out of position, the goalie's on his back. Yeah, talk all the crap you want. He's a really effective hockey player. He was great in the postseason. I want to say 14 goals in the playoffs. That's a lot of friggin' goals. You think about how many goals it takes to get to a Stanley Cup final, to get to a Game 7 of a Stanley Cup final. Zach Hyman is instrumental there. And you say, yeah, they depend too much on their power play. They have the best power play in the world, and that runs through McDavid. But because Zach Hyman is able to get to that quality area of the ice, because he's able to occupy such dangerous territory, the Oilers are able to convert on those power plays at a ridiculously high rate. There are not a lot of players in the world who can do that. You know, you think about the premier net front players in the league. You talk about Chris Kreider. You talk about Joe Pavelski, who I know retired, but he comes to mind in particular. Sebastian Aho is pretty good at it for the Hurricanes. Not on that tier, but a very good net front player. And there just frankly aren't a lot of quality net front players in the league, and Hyman is undoubtedly one of them. And yes, the contract is a little long. I don't think any have forecasted Hyman having this type of nice player in Toronto. So a really supplementary player, or saw him becoming a 50-goal guy. 35, maybe. Everything went right. 54 is just insanity. Like I said, only 9 players more goals in the season since 2010. That's a lot of goals. That's something to really take pride in, to nail the evaluation, have your professional scouting department identify, we think we can do more with this guy. Some other honorable mentions, getting Warren Foegele for Ethan Bear. I know at the time the trade didn't go great for the Oilers. Foegele, healthy scratch in the playoffs, but he was really good in the postseason this year for the Oilers. And I struggle to imagine the Oilers are going to find a way to keep Warren Foegele because, frankly, he's a good player, and he's the exact type of player that gets overpaid in free agency because he's got the skill set GMs love. He's quick on the puck, he forechecks, and he can score a goal occasionally. I think you're going to see Warren Foegele get a nice contract that starts with a 4 or a 5, something the Oilers just can't do with all of the other free agents they have. The Oilers are definitely going to need to reconstruct their bottom 6 and their penalty kill. So Jeff Jackson definitely has his handful. Other, and most importantly, Aaron Chris Knobloch. It was not an easy decision to fire Jay Woodcroft back in November. Jay Woodcroft, decent track record, very clearly liked amongst the players. And making that decision is gutsy. It takes a lot of conviction as a general manager, fire a coach 15, 16 games into the season because you know it's not just his fault. Jay Woodcroft isn't the reason Stuart Skinner couldn't make a save to save his life. With that in mind, we are going to take one more quick break, come back, we'll tackle some of the bad decisions, set the table for the look ahead, then we'll get to the weekend. I love sports. I love much. I never want them to stop. But with hockey and basketball over, we have fewer options to watch. And the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sport whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I mood. Always love betting it over on a baseball game. Get a little skin in the game, a little more investment than just watching my favorite team. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone. Every day, all summer long. So head over to fanduel.com/locked on and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Everybody listening to this Friday, or if you're watching live on Twitter, this Thursday afternoon edition of Locked On Oilers, we're recapping the Ken Holland duration, tenure, administration, whatever word you want to use to describe it, officially left the Oiler organization not seeking a contract extension. Contract expired. Jeff Jackson, the current Oilers president of hockey ops, is going to be the general manager on an interim basis, but did say on Thursday afternoon that he would like to have a new general manager in place as soon as there's an opportunity to start interviewing candidates. A lot going on, buyout windows open, the draft, free agency opening on Monday, a whole lot to handle. So probably not feasible to interview and hire candidates between now and the opening of the draft. So makes sense that Jackson's going to oversee it himself. So now let's get to the bad. And I'm going to start with this. I'm going to start with my spiel. This might sound a little the Oilers and Evander Kane, Corey Perry, when they did, for the prices they did. The Oilers were in a pinch. They did not have cap space, and they brought in less than reputable characters, assets, because of their character. Whether or not you agree with those decisions, whether or not you agree with the money they subsequently gave Evander Kane on a contract, that's not the point. It's just eventually not managing personalities or bringing in questionable personalities, it does eventually cause issues. The Oilers did not get burned by it, but the counterpoint to that is, how much better would the Oilers be if they had $5 million that Evander Kane was getting paid this year and another player? I know played injured, not the most productive season, but they knew that he was getting older when they gave him the 5-year extension after the 1-year, $1.2 million deal he got from the Sharks. That was that he got from the Oilers after the Sharks bought him out for voiding his contract for the weird, the fake vaccination card to get into Canada, all that weird stuff that happened 3 years ago now. But that, bringing in Perry after what happened in Chicago, it's icky. It makes you feel a little uncomfortable, but that's that as far as the moral quandary. Now, as far as actual hockey transactions, the biggest mistake, in my opinion, it's given Nurse the extension. They bought Darnell Nurse at the peak price. That 56-game Canada-only division was not real hockey. There was no defense being played. There was no good goaltending. Nurse put up a career year stats on a team that had to play, and the Oilers bought the cheese. They thought, oh, we've got a number one defenseman. And very clearly, in the subsequent 2 seasons since that extension, that's not who Nurse is. I think Nurse is probably worth half of what he's currently getting paid. And that might sound a little rough, but he's not going to provide counting stats because he's been usurped in the pecking order by Bouchard and Ekholm. He's not running power play 1. He's clearly deteriorating physically and not able to move as well as he did earlier in his career. And you got to be fair, he's older now. He's not as agile. He's not as mobile. And with that, a little more conservative as a defenseman, which makes you more prone to vulnerabilities off of the rush. It makes you more prone to guys going around. I feel very similar about Darnell Nurse to the way I feel about Jacob Trouba, in that a couple years ago, you saw what the team would have wanted from the player, but very clearly the physical decline has begun to set in on both of those players. And in the case of Nurse, you're stuck. That contract is outright immovable. You're not going to buy it out. But unfortunately, he's going to continue to get run. The Oilers, and you saw what you can do to mitigate that. You play him less. The Oilers, 2-minute decrease in time on ice in games 6 and 7 of the Vancouver series for Darnell Nurse, going from 18-something to 16-something. A real understanding that, hey, he can't play against other teams' best players. He's just not fast enough. And you can get away with hiding a guy. The conundrum is that he makes $9 million, and there just aren't a lot of defensemen who make that much money. Number 2, trading for Duncan Keith when they did was dumb. I understand, again, what they were trying to do, but Duncan Keith was 38 years old. He had sat out the prior season because he opted out. The Oilers gave up draft picks. They did the Blackhawks a favor. Duncan Keith was 37 going on 38 years old, and the Oilers gave up 2 draft picks and Caleb Jones. And what was a salary dump for the Blackhawks? The Blackhawks were just trying to get rid of Duncan Keith's money, and the Blackhawks didn't retain any salary. If the Oilers make a better decision there on defense in that position, they probably have a better long-term outcome. And I know that sounds very nitpicky for somebody who only played 1 season with the Oilers, but the Oilers and Duncan Keith were both set up to fail because of that decision. Next up, bringing in Zach Kassian and then subsequently having to give up draft picks to Arizona to make him go away. I don't know what they saw in that evaluation. Zach Kassian was very clearly not going to contribute to your top. For whatever reason, he was riding shotgun with McDavid, with Draisaitl at various points before the Oilers eventually made him go away. You know, that's the opposite end of the Zach Hyman evaluation. There are a lot of guys who can get to the net front. Zach Kassian, in theory, can get to the net front. He doesn't have the goal-scoring touch or the puck skills to be the complementary player that those guys were. And then the last one I'll touch on, giving Jack Campbell that contract as a free agent, I get it. You needed a goalie. You were desperate. Do not buy the Leafs goalie. Never buy a goalie from Carolina, from Toronto. Any of those teams that have good underlying numbers, they make their goalie's life very easy. You put them into a more difficult environment, very quickly you are going to understand a goalie's true talent. And in theory, you know, if the Oilers play better defense, you can get away with a less talented goalie. From all accounts, it does seem like the Oilers are going to buy out Jack Campbell at some point this summer. So we'll see what they do with that extra cap savings. I imagine they will give Calvin Pickard a 1-year deal to be the backup, unless they can find a goalie they prefer to Calvin Pickard to be the backup to Skinner. And Ken Holland does get credit for Stuart Skinner getting burned, getting an extension, because there are teams around the league who won't bench a player if they're making a lot of money, regardless of how it impacts the team. So you do get kudos for allowing your coach to handle the lineup card like an adult, but that will just about do it for this edition of Locked On Oilers. Subscribe wherever you're on Apple or Spotify. Please be so kind. Leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell. Let me know. What's the best move Ken Holland made? What's the worst move Ken Holland made? I'll read some of the best ones on Monday's show. Everybody enjoy your weekend. And until then, let's go Oilers.